You won't believe how one quiet morning, one voice in a packed studio, unleashed a reckoning no one could see coming. When truth finally shattered the silence, everything shifted. Press play to get in. It started on a morning no one saw coming, a quiet studio, an old senator confident of his influence, and a man still holding on to the belief that the truth could change everything. What happens when a country gets weary of mere words, when an audience quiets clapping and begins to listen, and when the tale of a child, a farmer, and a lost veteran turns out to be more powerful than any news headline? This is the instant one voice rose to fill the emptiness and demonstrated that hope doesn't disappear. Occasionally, it merely waits for someone who is willing to say it out loud. Let me tell you what actually happened that day. Chuck Schumer believed he could twist the truth regarding Donald Trump's immigration policy live on television. But then Vice President J.D. Vance intervened. With solid facts and a poised, unflinching demolition, Vance left Schumer humiliated before the whole nation. This was so potent it's now going viral everywhere online, and Americans are taking note. It was a sunny Tuesday morning when Senator Chuck Schumer settled into his seat on America's Pulse, a hit political talk show. The host hadn't even gotten through the intro when Schumer embarked on a fiery tirade. Trump's so-called big beautiful bill is a national disaster, Schumer started, his voice growing louder. This bill will rip the country apart. Families can't even buy eggs anymore, $5 a dozen, he cried, pointing a finger in the air. And Donald Trump? He doesn't care. He only cares about walls and billionaires. The studio grew silent. Home viewers craned forward. No one was brave enough to push back. Schumer had a reputation for pummeling Trump on the air. He never encountered anyone who stood up to him. But today was another day. Schumer didn't realize that Vice President J.D. Vance had been sitting in the green room, listening quietly. He wasn't even next on to speak. But hearing Schumer's words, he felt a hard anger growing within him. His fist tightened around the folder he carried. In it were the facts. Hard, uncontestable facts. He stared directly at the producer. "Put me in now," he instructed, his voice firm but calm. Today would not be an ordinary debate. Today would be a showdown, and America was about to see it for themselves. The camera pulled wide as the host smiled hectically, obviously unaware of what was going on backstage. And then, near silently but with unmistakable intent, Vice President Vance emerged onto the stage. The audience murmured in surprise. Schumer's face twisted in shock. This definitely wasn't part of the plan. J.D. didn't look angry. He looked focused, calm, as though he'd been waiting years for this very moment. He took a seat next to Schumer without a word. The host cleared his throat, sensing the tension. Mr. Vice President, this is unexpected. Is there something you'd like to say?" Vance nodded slightly, and then he turned to Schumer and stared him directly in the face. "You just informed the American people that eggs are $5 a dozen. That's not true," he said matter-of-factly. "The national average this morning is $2.29. The studio fell silent. "And you told people Trump's bill would bankrupt the nation," Vance continued. "Let's tell the truth for once." He opened his folder. The camera zoomed in, catching the clear, bold print of the documents inside. The facts were impossible to deny. Schumer swallowed hard. J.D. continued. "The big, beautiful bill cuts taxes for families, rewards hard work, and protects our borders. You're not afraid it will fail, Senator. You're afraid it will succeed." In the same way, the tone in the room changed. For the first time in a long time, Schumer looked speechless. He opened his mouth but remained silent. He looked at the host, expecting salvation, but there wasn't any. Vance moved a bit closer, his tone still serene. "You've lied to the American people for too long," he said. "You called this bill a disaster, but it gives tax breaks to waitresses working for tips, single mothers doing overtime, and small businesses struggling to survive. A woman in the audience gasped. Others leaned forward in their seats. J.D. stood now, holding the bill high for all to see. "You don't serve the people, Chuck," he said sternly. "You serve yourself. While you were complaining about eggs, millions of taxpayer dollars vanished under your watch." Schumer's face went red. That's slander," he stammered. J.D. didn't even flinch. "No," he said quietly. "It's math. It's records. It's the truth." And then came the sentence that cracked everything wide open. "The one thing more puffed up than your fabrications, Senator," Vance declared, his voice echoing clear, "is your bank account, sustained by the very people you purport to protect." The room did not erupt in applause. It sank into a heavy, shocked silence. Schumer was utterly shattered. This was no longer a debate. It was wrecking. And it was merely beginning. The words seemed to reverberate throughout the studio like thunder. "The only more bloated than your own falsehoods, Senator, is your bank account, tapped by the very same individuals you claim to be protecting." No one stirred. No one moved. They simply sat there paralyzed, observing what appeared to be a political earthquake in progress in real time. Schumer resembled a man who had just been stripped naked in public. He began to open his mouth. Schumer opened his mouth to try to defend himself, but nothing emerged. J.D. Vance did not raise his voice. He did not boast or smirk. He just continued to speak in that even, steady voice, like a teacher gently scolding a student who should have known better. "You believed nobody would verify your facts," J.D. replied, speaking low and distinctly. "You believed you could lie once more about the giant, gorgeous bill and make it out to be a weapon. This bill could be a lifeline for American workers. It reduces taxes on tips, on overtime, and it makes things better for actual families, people you've lost sight of." Cameras panned over the audience. A woman clutched her chest. A veteran in the second row wiped tears from his eyes. Schumer shook his head, mumbling, "You're twisting it." J.D. lifted his hand calmly. "No, Senator. For once, we're telling the truth." America kept watching. Turning toward the audience, not to boast but to explain, J.D. spoke slowly and clearly. "This bill doesn't destroy America. It saves it." He listed the points one by one. It reduces taxes for families. It helps waiters and waitresses hold on to their tips. It aids mothers working double shifts by increasing childcare credits. It invests in our military and border protection, the things that really protect Americans. Nods from the crowd. Facts were too real, too human to deny. J.D. continued, "Yes, the bill reduces clean energy subsidies, but it also puts money into oil and gas jobs that have supported middle-class families for generations." He paused, looking directly at Schumer. "You say Trump doesn't care, but who's really standing up for the people just trying to get by?" The host sat frozen, clearly overwhelmed. Chuck Schumer tried to break in, but his voice cracked. But what about the debt?" J.D. looked him in the eye without blinking. "Yes, it increases the debt. But so did each and every one of your bills to spend. Bills that awarded contracts to your contributors and padded the pockets of your supporters." Gasp moved through the audience. Whispers circulated. It was no longer a demolition. It was an awakening. And J.D. Vance wasn't done. Schumer's hands shook as he reached for the glass of water. He attempted to steady himself, but his voice was sharp and reedy. You're painting me the villain, J.D., when I've fought all my life on behalf of Americans." J.D. turned to him gently, nearly pitifully. "You were meant to be the people's voice, Chuck," he said. "But at some point, you became their cage." The words struck like another shockwave. J.D. unfolded a new page from his folder. Your files, Senator, he stated flatly. Millions spent on low-cost housing, gone, lost, and you initialed the documents. Schumer blanched. This is not the time and place to, he started. J.D. interrupted, stern but still composed. No, this is precisely where. Live television, so everyone can finally hear the truth. You don't fear Trump's policies, J.D. went on, voice rising just a touch. You fear what happens when they actually work. From the back of the studio, a man stood up, eyes red. Tell the truth, Chuck, he shouted. More voices joined in. You've lied for too long, someone called. Let J.D. speak. Chuck Schumer's face fell. The authority he once carried seemed to drain away right there in front of everyone. This was no longer a debate. This was the day the mask was removed. And for the first time in his illustrious career, Chuck Schumer had nowhere to run. As he slumped in his chair, looking for some kind of defense, J.D. Vance picked up a photo from his file. This is Frank, he said, holding up the photograph for all to see. His tone remained firm. He served in Vietnam. He draws a meager pension. But due to policy you voted for, Senator, his benefits were nearly terminated last winter. J.D. pulled the photo towards the camera so that the country could witness the old man standing alongside his dilapidated trailer in Ohio. Frank couldn't even pay for heating oil, J.D. continued. Meanwhile, you took a private plane to a donor's wedding in the Bahamas on PAC money. A silence fell in the room. The host was visibly shaken. One man stood up from the audience, shaking. I'm a vet, and he's right, he said. My rent increased. My benefits didn't. More and more stood up, each one of them. A nurse's uniform-clad woman wiped at her eyes. We believed you, Chuck, she whispered. Schumer surveyed the studio as if he were looking at these faces for the first time in his life. J.D. didn't gloat. He simply addressed him softly. You refer to compassion, he said, but you lost sight of how it looks. That was not just a stinging line, it shattered something within Schumer. And the nation continued to watch, chests constricting in their hearts. The host eventually attempted to take back control. Senator Schumer, he prompted softly, do you deny what the vice president just told us? Chuck stuttered. I don't handle personal benefit cases. That's not... J.D. raised his hand once again, as if assisting him to find the words. Let me help you, since you won't, he said. He unfolded another piece of paper. With your leadership, Senator, $85.5 million in housing assistance went unaccounted for. 2 years. J.D. turned to the audience. That's homes for seniors, he said quietly. Shelter for battered women, rent assistance for single parents. Lost. One of the mothers in the front row started to weep, her hand covering her mouth. J.D. continued, while Senator Schumer here is standing here saying that this bill, Trump's bill, is going to rip our country apart. He gazed directly at the camera. Let me tell you what it actually does. His tone remained even, but you could sense the gravitas of each word. It makes our military stronger. It pays for the wall on the border. It allows working Americans to take home more of their paycheck. And it makes social assistance fair by introducing work requirements for able-bodied recipients. Then he paused, allowing the truth to sink in. Yes, he admitted, it raises the debt. But it doesn't bury the future. It builds it. And in that moment, millions of people watching from home felt something shift. Maybe, they thought, they'd been lied to all along. Schumer tried one last time to claw back control. You think this one bill is going to fix everything? He snapped. This is just theater, J.D. You're putting on a show. J.D.'s eyes narrowed a little. Then he uttered the line that would be replayed on news cycles for weeks. No, Senator, he said flatly. You're the show. And it's closing night. The crowd gasped. Cameras focused on Schumer's face. Pale. gaunt, devastated. J.D. went on, his voice almost soft now. "You've spent years pretending to fight for the people," he said. "But you were fighting for your seat, for your contributors, for your reputation." His voice fell to a soft certainty. And today, that image disintegrated. Schumer leaned back in his chair. His hands dropped into his lap. Outside the studio, the clip was already running hot on the internet. Americans froze it, shared it, cried about it. Families barely keeping their heads above water. Veterans who felt abandoned. Workers who had always felt unseen. This was not merely a political moment. It was more than that. A moment of moral awakening. And J.D. Vance hadn't just won an argument. He'd given people their voice back. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Behind the scenes, chaos was brewing. Staffers whispered to each other. Producers stared wide-eyed at the monitors as viewer numbers surged into the millions. One of them murmured, "We've never seen anything like this." But J.D. wasn't thinking about ratings. He was thinking about the truth. He leaned toward the host, steady as ever. "Let me be done," he said flatly. "The people are owed it." The host nodded, nearly in reverence. J.D. addressed the audience once more and took out one final document. "Because Senator Schumer wants to speak about immigration," he said, "let's speak the truth there as well." He scanned the room, unblinking and steady. "He decries Trump's policy as cruel," he said. "But let me show you what's truly cruel." He held up a photo of a small girl. "This is Rosa. She's 6 years old. Her mom was killed by a cartel in Mexico. Rosa was smuggled over the border, raped, and left to die by herself in the desert." Gasps filled the room. Schumer looked like he'd been punched. J.D.'s voice trembled just for an instant. "We found her," he said. "She's safe now. But this all occurred because the borders are broken." He took a breath, his eyes glistening. "Trump's immigration policy isn't cruelty, it's protection, for kids like Rosa." Tears rolled down the faces of people in the crowd. Even one of the cameramen wiped away a tear. And J.D. Vance wasn't finished shattering hearts wide open. As he went on, scenes started rolling across the large screen behind him. Detention centers from past administrations, drug seizures, tearful parents at border memorials. J.D. allowed the hush fill the room. Then, quietly, he went on. "Senator Schumer battled every effort we made to correct this. Every wall, every patrol, every policy that could have saved lives. He labeled them racist." He rolled his head slightly. "But say that to Rosa's mom if she was still alive." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Schumer grumbled under his breath. "This is emotional manipulation." J.D. slowly turned around, his tone low but cutting as a knife. "No, Senator. This is the truth. The truth you've avoided while cowering behind talking points and slogans." He inched a bit closer. "And while you wept crocodile tears at podiums, actual families wept actual tears, burying their children." The camera panned the studio. Adult men wiped their eyes. A Latina mother in row 3 rocked back and forth, hands to her mouth. The host did not say a word. He didn't have to. America was watching, eyes wide with tears, hearts shattered. J.D. didn't desire cheers. He desired change, because he knew the truth touches people more deeply than any applause could ever hope to do. Slowly, he closed his folder. And then he looked directly into the camera. "I know some of you watching are confused," he explained, voice soft but firm. "You've heard one side of the story for too long. You were told Trump's immigration policy was hate, that this bill was chaos, that we didn't care." He paused. "But we do, deeply. And this bill, the big, beautiful bill, is proof." J.D. turned to Schumer and said the words that ended the debate once and for all. "You used fear to build your career," he said, voice steady. We're using truth to rebuild the country. Schumer's face fell. He looked small, almost hollow, defeated. Then something happened no one could have predicted. A woman in the crowd stood up, holding her little toddler against her shoulder. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Thank you, JD, for speaking the truth," she said. "My husband overdosed on fentanyl. You just spoke for him." Slowly, others stood up one by one. Some applauded. Others simply wept. Schumer could not find his words. He knew deep down that it was all over. The cameras had recorded it all. And outside, around the country, millions relived that moment again and again. The lies had finally crumbled. And J.D. Vance had won the heart of the country. But the accounting wasn't complete. More truths were yet to emerge. Truths deeper, darker, and more intimate than anyone could have imagined. Off camera, in the control room, a telephone rang. The producer answered, not knowing what he might hear. It was the White House. President Trump had been watching. "Let him continue," Trump said strongly. "Don't cut to another shot. Let America listen to it all." Back on stage, Schumer's staff was in a subdued panic. A staffer hurried over and handed him a note. Schumer read it. He went white. The message was simple. Don't struggle. Fall back. But it was too late. J.D. Vance wasn't finished. He held up a final document. "This," he started, voice unshakable, "is a federal audit." He stood there so everyone could read it. "Here's $3.6 million from a New York Veterans Housing Fund, all signed for by you, Senator Schumer." A loud thud rang out across the studio floor. Schumer's glass had fallen from his grasp and landed on the floor. The host gasped. Are you certain this is real?" he asked. J.D. nodded. "Confirmed this morning by 3 impartial agencies." Schumer glanced about, frantically, as if a man searching for an exit and finding none. Then J.D. leaned in and spoke so quietly it sent shivers throughout the room. "America gave you its trust," he told him, "and you spent it on yourself." At that moment, Chuck Schumer knew. His career was over, live on national TV. Silence filled the studio like heavy smoke. The cameras closed in on Schumer's shaking hands. He stared up at J.D., eyes brimming with tears. You don't know the pressure," he whispered. J.D. stopped. His face was nearly gentle. "We all get pressure, Senator," he said softly. "But not all of us sell out the people who had faith in us." Schumer had a tear roll down his cheek. "I began with good intentions," he said, his voice cracking. J.D. slowly nodded. "But you ended in greed." The audience remained still and silent, but you could feel the force of it bearing down on every heart. Schumer glanced around the room, then directly into the camera, and did something nobody was expecting. "I failed," he declared. His tone was soft but audible, and there was no escape from it. "I got too comfortable. I thought nobody would ever call me out on it. I was wrong." A soft wave of murmurs filled the air, some gasps. Even J.D. was taken aback for a moment. Schumer faced him. "You're not like me," he whispered. "You still believe." J.D. locked eyes with him. "I believe in America," he said. "And the people watching this, they do too. That's why they deserve better." For the first time, Schumer did not argue. He nodded slowly. It wasn't redemption, but it was real. And across the nation, people watched with tears in their eyes. Not necessarily because J.D. Vance had uncovered the lies, but because in that moment, the truth had finally prevailed. The host wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice thick with emotion, "we've just witnessed history." The room had changed. The nation had changed, and so had Chuck Schumer. He didn't leave in anger. He stood quietly, nodded to J.D. Vance, and stepped off the stage like a man who had finally seen the mirror for what it really was. J.D. returned to the stage, addressing the heart of the audience directly. "The big, beautiful bill isn't perfect," he stated, "but it's honest, and it's built on something we lost a long time ago." He held his hand out like he was pointing his finger into the screen behind him. A graph emerged. Egg prices plunging, gas prices stabilizing, border arrests of criminals rising. All of this, J.D. spoke softly, did not come about by chance. It came because we ceased to fear the noise and began to fight for you. A girl in the front row, approximately 10 years old, stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." Her voice was so tiny, but so strong that the entire room seemed to take a collective breath. J.D.'s eyes welled up with tears. "No," he whispered, voice shaking. "Thank you. You remind me why we fight." And that was the moment America didn't just respect J.D. Vance. They loved him. Because he hadn't just won an argument. He'd touched the nation's soul. When the show resumed from a brief commercial break, something surprising occurred. The producers opened up the phone lines for live calls. The first voice was of an older gentleman. His voice trembled but was firm. "Hello, I'm Harold," he started. "I'm a farmer from Indiana. Been farming 47 years. Voted Democrat my entire life, but I must say something." The studio fell into silence. J.D. raised his head, listening. "I heard Chuck Schumer shame this bill," Harold stated, "and lie about the cost of food as though he shops with us. Eggs aren't $5. Others in the crowd smiled as they cried. "And what this bill does, reducing taxes on small businesses, preventing individuals from cheating the system, that benefits us," Harold went on. J.D.'s eyes welled up with tears. "I have grandkids now," Harold said, his voice catching. "And for the first time in years, I think somebody in D.C. cares about us little people, and that somebody is you, Mr. Vance." The line was silent. The studio remained silent in that quiet. J.D. swallowed hard. Schumer glared at the ground, no spark left in him. Because when a lifelong Democrat farmer crosses over, not due to politics but due to truth, the dam has been breached, and the flood of voices was only just starting. As the crowd hummed with emotion, a producer approached J.D. and handed him a small, creased note. It had been handed to him during the show by a soft-spoken woman in the crowd. J.D. unwrapped it cautiously and read it silently. It was from Rosa, the 6-year-old girl he'd talked about. "Thank you, Mr. J.D.," the note said in childlike handwriting. "I have a bed now. I sleep safe. My new mommy says you helped us. I love America." J.D. stood still, the words sticking in his throat. He looked at the host. "Can I read something?" he asked softly. The host nodded again. J.D. read the letter from Rosa aloud. As he read, the sniffles became soft sobs. The camera cut across the audience, adult men and women dabbing at their faces, some clutching hands, others holding tissues to eyes. When he finished, J.D. carefully folded the letter, almost in awe. "This," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "this is why we fight. Not for headlines, not for seats. For Rosa, for the farmer, for every single person overlooked by Washington elites." He addressed Schumer, whose eyes were wet with shame. "You said we were destroying the country," J.D. said. "But, Senator, we're mending it, with truth, with grit, and with love." No one applauded. No one had to. Because that silence said more than thunder ever could. Backstage, Schumer's aides scrambled to contain the fallout. Phones rang without stopping. Headlines were already exploding online. J.D. Vance destroys Schumer on live TV. The moment America changed sides, nation in tears over Rosa's note. One aide whispered, "It's over, sir. You've got to resign." Schumer rubbed his temples, silent. He'd come into that studio full of pride and fire, certain no one would challenge him. But now, everything he'd built on half-truths was falling apart. On stage, J.D. stood steady as ever. "The big, beautiful bill doesn't fix everything," he admitted, voice soft. "But it starts something, a shift, a real one." He looked into the camera, speaking to every person watching at home. "To those who feel forgotten, you're not," he said. "You never were, and under this administration, you never will be again." In homes across America, people wept, not because it was politics, but because someone finally told the truth and made it personal. As J.D. took a step forward and extended his hand to Schumer, Chuck Schumer couldn't manage to accept it. Because even in defeat, some men would rather fall alone than rise with the people they once ignored. Social media blew up within minutes of the broadcast wrapping. Clips of J.D. Vance's subdued, heartbreaking dismantling spread like wildfire. The moment. J.D. Vance. Shut down the lies. Tears on live TV. Truth that hit America's heart. A TikTok of Rosa's note crossed 10 million views in under an hour. On Facebook, veterans reshared Harold the Farmer's call. On YouTube, the full debate was titled, "The Day J.D. Vance Crushed Corruption." With one sentence. In living rooms across the country, families watched with wide eyes. Some cried, some sat in stunned silence. Others rose and applauded, alone at home, but united in spirit. In Detroit, a father whose son died from fentanyl shared the clip with a brief caption. "At last, someone said it for us." But J.D. didn't dash to cameras. He didn't tweet triumph. He returned to his office, sat down calmly, and reached for the phone. "Get on the line to Rosa's new guardian," he instructed his aide. When the call connected, he spoke softly. "Thank her," he said. "Thank her. She made me proud to be American." For J.D. Vance, the headlines were never what mattered. They weren't about headlines. They were about healing. And that healing had only just started. That night, as the sun set over Washington, J.D. Vance sat in his office alone. In his hand was a letter he hadn't opened, one that had been delivered months earlier. It was from a mother in Tucson. Her handwriting was neat, but the words trembled with grief. "Dear J.D.," it read, "I don't know if you'll read this. My son was killed by an illegal who had already been deported twice, but was let back in because of open border policies. His name was Eli. He was 12. He loved trains. He looked like your son in that Christmas photo. I just wanted someone in Washington to know his name." J.D. closed his eyes. He whispered the name, Eli. Then he folded the letter and slipped it into his breast pocket, over his heart. Minutes later, he dialed his phone and called America's Pulse producer. "I want to return," he said softly. "Not for a battle. Just for Eli." The producer didn't flinch. "Of course," he said. The world had watched J.D. Vance the politician, but today they were going to see J.D. Vance the father, the man who didn't speak for polls or influence, but for hurt. And that sort of truth, that sort of heart, it can revolutionize a nation. The following morning, sans cameras, sans crowds, J.D. returned quietly to the same studio. No lights, no makeup, no stage crew, just him. He walked onto the vacant set, where everything had shifted. He remained motionless for an instant, gazing at the chair that Chuck Schumer had occupied. And then softly, he put something down. One photograph. Eli, the 12-year-old boy from the letter. JD talked out loud, despite there being no one present. This is who policy is for. Not for headlines, not for careers. For children. For families. From his pocket, he drew a toy train engine the size of his thumb, something a boy such as Eli would have loved, and set it alongside the photo. Someone backstage happened to video it on his phone. It was not staged. It wasn't scripted. Just a man mourning a boy whom he never knew. That brief, 30-second snippet raced around the internet like wildfire. J.D. Vance makes the country weep, returning to pay tribute to a boy he never knew. That was the banner. But it wasn't an isolated moment. It was a movement. Thousands of Americans, parents, siblings, grandparents, began writing their own letters, their grief, their realities. Within 24 hours, it had a name: Justice for Eli. And J.D. Vance was no longer a mere political figure. He had transcended that. He had become something else. He was hope. And the people watching this, they believe too. That's why they deserve better. For the first time, Chuck Schumer didn't resist. He nodded, quietly, slowly. It wasn't redemption, but it was true. And across the country, people sat in silence, tears in their eyes. Not just because J.D. Vance had revealed the falsehoods, but because at that moment, truth had finally triumphed. The host rubbed his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just witnessed history. The room had changed. The nation had changed. And so had Chuck Schumer. He didn't storm away. He didn't slam a podium or fault the press. He remained standing, gave J.D. Vance a slight nod, and descended from the platform, like a man who at last beheld the mirror without vagueness. J.D. remained behind. Cameras trailed after him. He faced the crowd, his voice low and genuine. The big, beautiful bill isn't perfect, but it's honest. And it's founded on something we lost long ago: accountability. He stood up and gestured toward the screen behind him. A simple chart materialized. Egg prices dropping, gas prices leveling off, border apprehensions of criminals increasing. This didn't occur randomly, J.D. declared. It occurred because we ceased being intimidated by the noise and began fighting on your behalf. In the front row, a small girl, perhaps 10 years old, stood up. Her voice was tiny but unmistakable. Thank you, Mr. Vance. J.D.'s eyes welled up. No, thank you. You remind me why we fight. And in that hushed, unyielding moment, America didn't merely respect J.D. Vance. They adored him, because he hadn't merely won an argument. He'd touched the country's soul. At 6:45 a.m. the following morning, a black SUV arrived at the side entrance of the Capitol. Chuck Schumer emerged, alone. No staff, no press, just a manila folder clutched tightly in his hands. Reporters shouted his name. He didn't answer. He walked straight into the Senate Ethics Committee's office and placed the folder on the table. Inside, bank records, private emails, financial disclosures, proof of where the money had gone, names, contracts, signatures. The room froze. One senator whispered, "You're turning yourself in." Schumer nodded. His voice was low, hoarse. The people deserve the truth, even if it ends me. No speech, no press conference. Action. J.D. Vance was told an hour later. He stood in his window, quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "That took courage. Late, but real." From coast to coast, the news spread like a slow, heavy wave. No shouting, just contemplation. For to many, this wasn't simply about politics. It was about morals. Sometimes the greatest apology isn't delivered from a podium. It's delivered on paper, signed, surrendered, accountable. Later that night, J.D. Vance was asked for a prime-time interview. He nearly declined. Then Rosa's adoptive mother sent a video. It showed Rosa holding a homemade sign, her voice gentle. "Tell America, thank you for saving me." JD signed on. The interview went live. No notes, no preparation, just JD and a reserved anchor. "You took down a powerful man," said the host. "You made the country weep. What now?" JD smiled softly. This was never about taking someone down. It was about standing up for someone. Rosa, Eli, the farmer, all of them. The host moved in. "What sets you apart, Mr. Vance?" JD hesitated. "I don't listen to polls. I don't listen to noise. I listen to pain and try to do something with it." By the end of it, the anchor's eyes were glassy. He shook JD's hand. "Thank you for reminding us what this job was supposed to mean." And from coast to coast across America, millions watched, not with their eyes alone, but with their hearts. They didn't just believe in a party or a bill. They believed in a man who refused to be quiet. The next morning, the Senate met for the final vote on the big, beautiful bill. Feelings ran deep. Some senators sported red pins for Eli, others yellow for Rosa. J.D. Vance came in with 2 folded pieces of artwork, one from Rosa, one from a room full of kids. He laid them out on his desk. The chamber fell silent. Even the bill's opponents couldn't overlook its emotional weight. J.D. stood, voice firm. "I know not everybody supports this bill, but let's be real. America has been quietly bleeding, not only from numbers, but from neglect." He waved towards the sketches. "This bill, it's for the people who feel invisible, who don't have PACs or lobbyists, who don't get heard." He fell silent. This is our moment to remind them, we still see you. And so the vote was called. It passed. Thunderous applause erupted in the chamber. Some cried openly. Others embraced one another in silent relief. Even old foes nodded, somber, their eyes moist with emotion. The big, beautiful bill, once derided, once discarded, was now the law of the land. And J.D. Vance hadn't just written policy. He'd written history, 1 page at a time, with a pen and a heart full of purpose. 2 days later, J.D. Vance visited the White House. President Trump welcomed him into the Oval Office with a firm handshake and an unusual, reflective moment of silence. "You didn't just win a debate," Trump declared. "You changed the temperature of this country." J.D. nodded modestly. "I didn't do it alone, sir. The truth did the heavy lifting." They sat down together to chart the next moves: implementation, outreach, support. But J.D. had one condition. "I want to create a task force," he said. "Not with lobbyists or lawyers, but with actual people. Parents who have lost children, farmers such as Harold, even children like Rosa, who know fear better than most adult men." Trump nodded in agreement. Make it happen. 48 hours later, a large wooden table in a small room with a view of the Washington Monument was packed. Mothers, fathers, veterans, children. J.D. Vance presided at the head, but he did not open his mouth first. He listened. And for the first time in a very long time, the individuals who most often remained unheard sat at the table and didn't think they were being used. They were finally visible. On Sunday morning, the church bells tolled throughout America, not out of routine, but for memory. In small cities and large cities, they prayed for truth, for unity, for healing. Some read the name of Eli aloud. Some spoke of Rosa. Others lit candles for tales that never saw the headlines. In schools, children sketched pictures of what it meant to be brave. Some sketched J.D. Vance. Some sketched the border wall, Others sketched Rosa's reserved smile. Even JD's most vociferous political enemies issued statements, without rancor, but with subdued awe. "I disagreed with the bill," one senator stated, "but I can't deny what JD Vance did. He reminded us why we started serving in the first place." At a Pennsylvania veterans' home, Farmer Harold watched JD's interview live on television. His eyes welled up with tears as he whispered, "That man did more in 48 hours than some did in 48 years." JD never sought that level of acclaim, but America gave it freely, not because he was flawless, but because when it counted the most, he spoke the truth, and spoke it from the heart. That night, JD Vance appeared before a lone camera. No glamorous lighting, no scripted presentation, just a still room, and a man who spoke from the heart. He gazed directly into the camera lens. "This narrative was never about me. It was about you." He displayed Rosa's note. "This was written by a little girl saved from a life of terror." Then he waved Eli's letter. "And this is what a mother who only wanted to hear her boy's name read aloud wrote." He clasped his hands, firm. The big, beautiful bill didn't save America, but it reminded us we still can. A faint, weary smile crept over his face. "And now, it's your turn." He leaned close, voice low and certain. "If this story made you think, or cry, or believe again, don't just scroll past. Hit the like button. Leave a comment. Tell us what part spoke to your heart." He gestured softly toward the screen. "And if you believe in truth, in second chances, and in us, subscribe. Stay with us, because the fight for the soul of this country is just beginning." And then came the last words, simple, unpolished, real. "I'm JD Vance, and no matter who you are, I'm fighting for you." And the world didn't just understand, it felt it, still.